Hey, I'm Eliana Rose, and now I want to explaining the movie of Saiyaara. Its brief review and explanation of Saiyaara movie. Please watch and knows how was the Saiyaara movie and enjoy the movie. Please subscribe and like my video before watch the movie. Let's now we start the movie review and explanation. What is Saiyaara? Saiyaara is a 2025 Indian Hindi romantic drama directed by Mohit Suri and produced under Yash Raj Films. It features debut performances by Ahaan Panday as Krish Kapoor, a struggling musician, and Aneet Padda as Vani Batra, a writer recently diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's disease. Saiyaara premiered in theaters on 18 July 2025. The film became a massive hit. Within roughly 16-17 days, it earned over 460 crore worldwide with 291. 7 crore net in India and approximately 110 crore overseas. It crossed the 300 crore mark domestically by the end of its third weekend, making it the first Indian romantic film to achieve that milestone. Overall, it stands as the second highest grossing Hindi film of 2025, trailing only behind CH Hava and the highest grossing Indian romantic film of the year. Story and themes. The narrative explores the emotional bond between Krish and Vani as they connect through music, art, and memory, with Vani's Alzheimer's diagnosis adding profound emotional stakes. Critics highlighted the film's soulful music, visually lush presentation, and the chemistry between the lead actors as key strengths, even if the core story follows familiar tropes. Music and soundtrack. The soundtrack features 7 songs by composers such as Mithun, Tanishq Bagchai, Fahim Abdullah, Arslan Nizami, Vishal Misra, and Seshi Parampara, with lyrics by Urshad Kamal, Mithun, Rishabh Kant, and Raj Shekhar. The lead vocalists include Arijit Singh, Shreya Ghoshal, Jubin Nautiyal, and others. The album was officially released on 4 July 2025, with singles dropping from early June onward. After its theatrical success, Saiyaara made history by becoming the first Yash Raj Films movie to debut on Netflix. Its digital release was rumored around Diwali 2025, with earlier speculations around September later postponed to benefit from box office momentum. In summary, the title is Saiyaara Not Saiyaara. It's a 2025 musical romantic drama by Mohit Suri, introducing fresh lead actors with a poignant storyline and chart-topping music. It achieved record-breaking box office success, becoming a defining romantic hit of the year. It's set to stream on Netflix, marking a new digital strategy for YRF theatrical films. In Saiyaara, the debut performances by Ahaan Panday and Aneet Padda are one of the film's most surprising and rewarding elements. Both actors are newcomers to the big screen, yet they carry the emotional weight of the film with a maturity and natural presence that's rare for first-timers. Ahaan plays Krish, a struggling musician who is passionate, vulnerable, and full of heart. He brings a quiet intensity to the role, portraying Krish not as a hero, but as a deeply human character dealing with love, fear, and loss. Aneet Padda, on the other hand, delivers a beautifully nuanced performance as Vani, a young writer grappling with the early stages of Alzheimer's. Her portrayal is gentle, controlled, and full of quiet strength. She doesn't overplay the illness. Instead, she lets it creep subtly into her expressions, her speech, and her body language. Her performance makes the audience feel Vani's confusion and pain, but also her desire to live fully in the present. Together, Ahaan and Aneet bring a genuine and believable chemistry to the screen. They don't just act as lovers, they feel like two people slowly falling into a deep, complicated connection. For debut actors to deliver such layered, emotionally intelligent performances is impressive. It sets a high bar for their future careers and gives Saiyaara a strong emotional foundation from start to finish. The love story at the heart of Saiyaara is tender, poetic, and deeply emotional. It begins quietly, with a chance meeting between Krish, an aspiring musician searching for his voice, and Vani, a thoughtful young writer who has recently received a devastating diagnosis, early-onset Alzheimer's. What starts as a simple connection slowly grows into something profound, not just through words but through the silences they share, the glances, and the comfort they find in each other's company. There's a kind of stillness in their relationship that feels real, not rushed or overly dramatic, but built on mutual understanding, creativity, and the shared desire to hold on to something meaningful. Krish is drawn to Vani's calm and introspective nature, while Vani finds light in Krish's music and passion. As the film progresses, their relationship deepens not because of grand romantic gestures, but through small, intimate moments writing together, composing songs, reliving memories, and confronting fears. They both carry emotional wounds, but instead of fixing each other, they simply hold space for one another, which is rare and beautiful to witness on screen. What makes their love story especially powerful is the tragic awareness that time is not on their side. Vani's illness means their moments together are numbered and fragile, which adds a quiet urgency to their connection. Yet rather than focus on fear or despair, the film chooses to celebrate their choice to love fully in the time they have. It's not just a romance, it's a reminder of the kind of love that accepts imperfection, embraces vulnerability, and lives in the present. Their story is not about how long love lasts, but how deeply it can be felt in the moment. The turning point in Saiyaara comes with the revelation that Vani, the female lead, has been diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease, a progressive neurological condition that causes memory loss, confusion, and ultimately the erosion of identity. This isn't just a dramatic device thrown in for emotional weight. It's the heart of the film's emotional journey, shaping the trajectory of the characters' relationship and giving the story its quiet urgency. Vani's diagnosis isn't revealed in a dramatic monologue or shocking scene. Instead, it unfolds gradually through subtle changes in her behavior, forgotten names, misplaced thoughts, a look of confusion that lingers too long. The film treats her condition with sensitivity, showing not only how it affects her, but how it reshapes her world and the lives of those around her, especially Krish. She is not reduced to her illness, rather, her struggle is portrayed as a part of her humanity. Her vulnerability, her attempts to hold on to her words and memories, and her courage in the face of a disappearing self are portrayed with deep respect. For Krish, the realization of her condition is devastating, but he doesn't run. Instead, he becomes her anchor, choosing to stay, to love her not for who she was or who she might become, but for who she is in the moment. This choice adds depth to their love story, transforming it into something more than romantic. It becomes about acceptance, patience, and emotional endurance. He writes songs inspired by her, records her voice, and tries to build memory through music, in the hope that something of their love will remain even when her mind begins to forget. The Alzheimer's twist doesn't turn the movie into a tragedy. It elevates it into a meditation on memory, identity, and love. It raises important questions. What do we hold on to when everything starts to fade? Can love exist without memory? Saiyaara doesn't offer easy answers, but through Vani's journey, it invites the audience to consider the fragility of time and the beauty of simply being present with someone, even if they might not remember it later. Music plays an essential, almost spiritual role in Saiyaara. It is not merely background sound or a tool for entertainment. It is woven deeply into the fabric of the story, shaping both the narrative and the emotional landscape of the film. Krish, the male protagonist, is a struggling musician whose entire life revolves around sound, rhythm, and expression. For him, music is more than a career, it's how he processes the world, expresses emotion, and ultimately connects with others. When he meets Vani, their bond begins quietly, but it's through music that their connection grows deeper, more intimate, and more honest. As Vani begins to lose her memory to Alzheimer's, music becomes a lifeline between her and Krish. He writes songs inspired by her words, her thoughts, and even her silences. These compositions become emotional time capsules, a way for Krish to hold on to pieces of her as they slowly slip away. There's a particularly powerful theme running through the film that while memories may fade, melodies endure. It's this idea that gives the film its soul. The soundtrack of Saiyaara is rich, carefully curated, and deeply emotional. Each song is tied to a particular moment or turning point in the story, not just echoing the feelings of the characters, but actively moving the plot forward. When words fail Vani, it is music that speaks for her. When Krish struggles to communicate his grief and helplessness, it is through lyrics and chords that he finds expression. In this way, the songs in Saiyaara act as narrative tools, guiding the audience through moments of love, joy, longing, fear, and heartbreak. Moreover, the film uses music as a metaphor for memory itself. Just like a familiar tune can pull us back to a specific time or person, Krish's songs become an attempt to anchor Vani to the present and to their love story. He creates melodies that she might remember, rhythms that might spark something familiar even as her mind becomes a stranger to her own past. Ultimately, the music-driven plot of Saiyaara does more than add aesthetic beauty. It gives the story its heartbeat. It helps convey emotions too complex for dialogue alone and offers the characters, especially Krish, a way to preserve the essence of love in the face of inevitable loss. Through music, the film tells a story not just of romance, but of memory, legacy, and the universal longing to be remembered. The chemistry between Ahaan Panday and Aneet Padda in Saiyaara is one of the film's most compelling strengths, and it serves as the emotional glue that holds the entire story together. Their on-screen connection doesn't rely on dramatic declarations of love or over-the-top romance. Instead, it grows organically, scene by scene, through quiet conversations, lingering eye contact, shared silences, and subtle emotional shifts. It's the kind of chemistry that feels lived in and authentic, one that doesn't need to be forced or exaggerated to feel real. From their very first encounter, there's a natural rhythm between them. Krish, with his restless energy and artistic frustration, contrasts beautifully with Vani's stillness and introspective aura. Yet, despite their differences, there's an immediate sense that they understand each other in ways that others don't. This dynamic becomes more pronounced as the story unfolds. Their conversations feel spontaneous, their laughter unpracticed, and their emotional moments shared with a kind of unspoken trust that's difficult to fake. It doesn't feel like two actors performing romance. It feels like two people learning to love each other step by step in a world that may not give them forever. As Vani's Alzheimer's progresses, the chemistry between them deepens into something more powerful than physical attraction or youthful infatuation. It becomes about presence, about showing up for one another when things start to fall apart. Krish never tries to save her. Instead, he chooses to simply be there, with love that is steady, patient, and unconditional. This emotional maturity in their relationship makes their connection feel even more intense. Watching them interact is at times heartbreaking, especially in moments when Vani starts forgetting details, and Krish continues to love her with the same intensity, as if holding on to both their memories. There's also an emotional layering to their intimacy. In scenes where they write together, listen to music, or share quiet moments without speaking, there's a profound emotional current. It's chemistry that transcends words, built not on performance, but on emotional resonance. Even in scenes of conflict or despair, their energy remains deeply connected, making the audience feel every bit of the pain, hope, and love they experience. In many films, chemistry can feel surface level, passion without substance. But in Saiyaara, the chemistry between the leads is transformative. It elevates the story, making it more than a romantic plot. It becomes a study of what it means to truly see someone, to love them not just for who they are today, but for who they've been and who they may become, even as those details begin to fade. Their bond is the kind that stays with you long after the credits roll. The visual language of Saiyaara is one of its most striking and emotionally resonant elements. From the very first frame, the film establishes a strong aesthetic identity, rich in color, texture, and composition, that mirrors the emotional beats of the story. Every shot feels purposeful, not just in terms of cinematic beauty, but in how it deepens the emotional atmosphere surrounding the characters and their evolving relationship. The cinematography leans heavily into soft lighting, warm tones, and natural backdrops. Whether it's the glow of early morning sunlight filtering through a window, the golden haze of a late afternoon in a quiet park, or the twinkling fairy lights that illuminate a rooftop jam session, the visuals are soaked in a kind of nostalgic warmth that reflects both the tenderness and fragility of the central love story. These aren't just pretty pictures, they serve a narrative function. The changing light often parallels Vani's mental state or Krish's emotional journey. Scenes grow dimmer and more shadowed as her memory deteriorates, contrasting sharply with the bright, open visuals of their early connection. There's a lyrical, almost poetic quality to the way the camera moves. It lingers just long enough to let a moment breathe, like when Vani's hand brushes against Krish's on a piano key, or when she stares quietly at a forgotten word in her notebook. These moments are captured with restraint, letting the visuals carry the emotion without needing to explain everything with dialogue. This technique creates a sense of intimacy between the viewer and the characters, as if we're witnessing memories rather than scenes. The use of location also plays a significant role in the film's visual storytelling. Urban rooftops, empty cafes, quiet libraries, and rainy streets aren't just settings, they become emotional spaces, almost like characters themselves. These places hold echoes of joy, fear, love, and eventually loss. The camera doesn't rush through them, it observes, allowing us to soak in the mood and feel the weight of what's left unspoken. One particularly moving motif is the use of mirrors, reflections, and glass, subtle visual metaphors for memory, identity, and the distortion of reality that Vani experiences as her Alzheimer's progresses. These elements are never overused but placed carefully throughout the film to add layers of meaning without distracting from the story. Even the costume and color palettes evolve with the characters. In the early stages of their relationship, the colors are vibrant, filled with life and artistic energy. As the tone shifts, so does the visual language. Muted blues, grays, and earth tones begin to dominate, mirroring the emotional heaviness that sets in. Altogether, the beautiful visuals in Saiyaara do more than create an aesthetically pleasing film. They elevate the emotional experience. They create a world that feels both real and slightly dreamlike, pulling the audience into a story where every frame is a memory, every shadow a thought left behind, and every beam of light a small hope held onto. The film becomes a visual love letter, not just to romance, but to the delicate, fleeting beauty of moments we wish we could hold forever. The emotional conflict in Saiyaara runs deep, not through loud arguments or dramatic confrontations, but through quiet pain, unspoken fears, and the slow, heartbreaking realization that love alone may not be enough to stop time or illness. At the center of this emotional struggle is the relationship between Krish and Vani, two people who find comfort and healing in one another just as they're faced with a condition that threatens to erase everything they've built. For Krish, the emotional conflict begins with joy. He's finally found someone who understands him, someone who inspires his music and gives meaning to his artistic frustration. But that joy quickly turns into fear and helplessness when he learns about Vani's diagnosis. She is young, vibrant, intelligent, and yet her future is clouded by a disease that will rob her of her memories, her language, and eventually her sense of self. Krish is not prepared for this. No one is. And yet he makes a choice. He decides to stay. That decision is both beautiful and painful, because from that point forward, every happy moment is haunted by the knowledge that it may be forgotten. Vani, on the other hand, carries a different kind of conflict. She is aware of what's happening to her, and that awareness brings with it a quiet sorrow. She wants to live fully, to love, to create, but she also doesn't want to become a burden. She tries to hold on to her routines, her writing, and her independence even as her world begins to blur. There's a constant emotional push and pull inside her, between wanting to embrace the love she feels for Krish and fearing the inevitability of fading away in front of him. Her internal struggle is portrayed with dignity and restraint, making it all the more powerful. The emotional conflict between them is not rooted in mistrust or betrayal, but in vulnerability. How much of themselves they're willing to expose, and how much pain they're willing to endure together. There are moments when Vani pulls away, trying to protect Krish from her future, and there are moments when Krish, in his desperation, tries to fight against something he can't control. He writes music to preserve her voice, creates recordings of her speaking, and even tries to capture the essence of who she is in songs, knowing that one day those recordings may mean more to him than she can understand in the moment. What makes the emotional conflict in Saiyaara so powerful is that it's deeply human. It doesn't rely on melodrama or tragedy for the sake of tears. Instead, it explores the quiet devastation of watching someone you love slowly drift away, and the emotional courage it takes to keep showing up anyway. It's about love in its rawest form, the kind that exists without guarantees, that accepts heartbreak as part of the journey, and that chooses presence over promises. In the end, the emotional conflict in Saiyaara is not resolved in a neat, happy ending. It lingers just like real grief, real love, and real memory. But what the film offers is something even more meaningful. The idea that in spite of loss, in spite of fear, there is still beauty in loving someone as they are, and in holding on, even if they might forget. Saiyaara is a film soaked in heartfelt emotions, not just in isolated scenes, but as a constant, gentle current running through the entire narrative. From the moment Krish and Vani meet, there's a sense that the story isn't aiming to impress with grand gestures or cinematic spectacle. Instead, it's designed to make the audience feel, to sit with the small, fragile human emotions that define love, fear, connection, and loss. The emotional core of the film lies in its portrayal of two people who are trying to love each other as deeply as possible, while knowing they are living on borrowed time. The tenderness in their growing relationship is never rushed. Their love builds slowly, layered with trust, shared silences, creative collaboration, and mutual care. This slow unfolding allows the audience to feel invested in their bond, making the emotional journey more impactful as Vani's condition begins to surface. There's something incredibly moving about watching two people who have only just found each other begin to lose pieces of their shared experience, not because of conflict, but because of something neither of them can control. Vani's vulnerability is portrayed with such quiet intensity that even the smallest gestures, pauses in speech, forgetting simple words, a slight hesitation when recognizing Krish, hit with profound emotional weight. These aren't loud, dramatic breakdowns. They are understated moments, and that subtlety makes them even more real. You feel the heartbreak not in explosive scenes, but in the gentleness with which Krish helps her remember, the way he hides his own fear to protect her peace, the way he smiles at her even when she doesn't remember who he is. Krish's emotional arc is equally powerful. He begins as a frustrated, aimless artist, but as he falls in love with Vani, he becomes grounded, not because she fixes him, but because her presence gives his life a deeper emotional purpose. His transformation is tender and selfless. He writes songs for her not to showcase his talent, but to preserve what they have. He becomes a caretaker without ever losing sight of the fact that she is still her own person, even as parts of her begin to fade. His emotional journey is one of acceptance, endurance, and deep, unconditional love. The film also succeeds in making the audience feel a wide spectrum of emotions. There are scenes of quiet joy, simple, beautiful moments like dancing in the rain, humming a tune together, reading poetry in the sun, that make you smile through tears. There are moments of bittersweet humor, where the characters try to laugh through the pain, and scenes of deep grief where silence speaks louder than words. But most importantly, there's hope, not in the promise of a cure or a perfect ending, but in the resilience of love itself. Saiyaara doesn't manipulate your emotions, it earns them. It allows you to connect with the characters and walk alongside them, feeling their joy and sorrow as your own. The film's emotional resonance lingers long after the credits roll, not just because of what happens, but because of how deeply and truthfully it makes you care. It's a story that doesn't just tell you what love looks like, it shows you what love feels like in all its painful, beautiful, and fleeting reality. The direction in Saiyaara, helmed by Mohit Suri, is a masterclass in emotional storytelling, subtle, precise, and deeply intuitive. Rather than relying on flashy visuals or over-the-top drama, Suri chooses to tell this delicate story with restraint and grace, allowing the emotions to breathe and the characters to evolve naturally. His vision for the film is clear: to create a romantic narrative that feels intimate and personal, yet universally relatable, and in doing so, he avoids many of the cliches typically found in love stories centered around illness or tragedy. One of the most striking aspects of his direction is the tone he maintains throughout the film. From beginning to end, Saiyaara feels emotionally grounded. Suri doesn't sensationalize Vonnie's Alzheimer's diagnosis or treat it as a plot gimmick. Instead, he approaches it with deep empathy, showing how it affects not only Vonnie's identity, but also her sense of agency, her relationships, and her future. He makes sure we see her not as a symbol of suffering, but as a full person, creative, witty, loving, and scared. That balance between strength and fragility is handled with care, which makes her journey all the more impactful. Equally impressive is how Suri directs the relationship between Krish and Vonnie. He gives their love story time to develop, letting the audience invest in them without rushing emotional payoffs. The silences between them are as important as the dialogue. Their connection is shown through gestures, shared spaces, unfinished thoughts, and lingering eye contact. Suri knows when to hold the camera, when to let a moment sit, and when to step back entirely. This kind of patience in storytelling is rare and shows a director deeply in tune with his characters and the emotional rhythm of the film. The performances by Ahaan Panday and Aneet Padda also reflect Suri's strength as an actor's director. Both were newcomers, yet he draws out layered, nuanced portrayals from them, never letting them lean into melodrama or overperformance. He allows their vulnerability to come through in small, honest moments, moments that feel more powerful than any grand romantic scene could. That kind of emotional honesty is hard to direct, especially with debut actors, but Suri does it with remarkable ease. Suri also brings a strong visual language to the film. The color palette, the lighting, the use of space, all serve the emotional arc of the story, but he never lets the visual beauty overpower the human drama. Everything works in harmony, creating an atmosphere where the viewer doesn't just watch the story unfold, they feel it, inhabit it. His direction turns scenes into memories, each frame crafted to reflect the fading but beautiful nature of Vani's world and the emotional weight Krish carries. Importantly, Suri resists the urge to provide neat conclusions or exaggerated sentiment. He lets pain exist alongside love, allowing the story to remain true to life. He understands that some of the most meaningful moments are the quietest ones, the hand held a second longer, the unsent letter, the unfinished song, and he captures those moments without fanfare, trusting the audience to feel what the characters cannot always say. In Saiyaara, Suri doesn't just tell a story, he creates an emotional experience. His skilled direction turns a potentially predictable love, tragedy set up into something deeply human, intimate, and unforgettable. Through sensitivity, control, and emotional intelligence, he elevates the film from a simple romance to a lasting meditation on love, memory, and what it means to stay present with someone, even when the future is slipping away. The meaningful message at the heart of Saiyaara is what ultimately gives the film its lasting emotional power. Beneath its romantic storyline and emotional highs and lows, the film quietly delivers a reflection on life, love, memory, and the impermanence of time. It doesn't preach or dramatize for effect. Instead, it allows the message to unfold gently through the lives of its characters, their choices, and the moments they share as they face something far larger than either of them can control. At its core, Saiyaara is a story about what it means to truly love someone, not just in the easy, beautiful moments, but in the uncertain, painful, and even heartbreaking ones. Krish and Vani's relationship is defined not by perfection, longevity, or certainty, but by presence. The film suggests that real love is not measured by how long it lasts or how perfect it looks from the outside, but by how deeply you are willing to be present for someone, even as they begin to forget the very memories you shared. This idea is especially poignant because of Vani's condition. Her Alzheimer's diagnosis is a reminder that life doesn't come with guarantees. Memory, something we so often take for granted, becomes a fragile, fading thread. And yet, the film doesn't treat this as a hopeless tragedy. Instead, it becomes a source of meaning. Krish's devotion to Vani, even as her identity slips away, is a beautiful testament to the idea that love can exist beyond memory. He chooses to stay to support and to love her even when she no longer recognizes him. That kind of love is rare, selfless, and deeply human. And it's exactly what Saiyaara celebrates. There's also a profound message about time. The characters in Saiyaara don't have decades together. Their love is lived in days, in shared songs, in written words, and in fleeting moments. But the film suggests that the value of love isn't in how long it lasts, it's in how fully you live it while it's there. Vani, even knowing her diagnosis, chooses to embrace love instead of fear. Krish, even knowing the outcome, chooses to keep creating, keep loving, and keep being present. Through this, the film gently asks its audience to reconsider what truly matters. Is it the length of the journey or the depth of the connection? In a broader sense, Saiyaara also speaks to anyone who has experienced loss, especially the slow, painful kind where a loved one fades gradually due to illness. It acknowledges the quiet grief of watching someone you love disappear, not physically, but mentally and emotionally. And yet, it offers comfort in the idea that even when memories fade, love can still leave an imprint. That presence, kindness, music, and shared time, even if not remembered, still matter. The actions we take in love are never wasted, even if they are eventually forgotten. Ultimately, the message of Saiyaara is one of hope, resilience, and emotional truth. It reminds us to hold on a little tighter to the people we love, to appreciate the ordinary moments, and to love without expecting permanence. Because in a world where so much is uncertain, love, real, present, selfless love, is the one thing that can make time meaningful, no matter how short or fragile it may be. Now we start the explanation of this movie in two parts. Part 1. Saiyaara is a 2025 Hindi romantic drama directed by Mohit Suri that tells the deeply moving story of two young people, Krish, a struggling musician searching for artistic purpose, and Vani, a quiet, thoughtful writer recently diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease. Their paths cross unexpectedly, and what begins as a casual encounter soon evolves into a tender, life-changing connection. At the start, Krish is frustrated with his stalled career and lack of direction. Vani, on the other hand, lives a more structured, introspective life, having just begun to grapple with the terrifying knowledge that her memory is starting to slip away. Despite their differences, they find something healing in each other. Krish is drawn to Vani's clarity, while Vani finds light and spontaneity in Krish's music. Their bond deepens through shared moments, writing, playing music, exchanging ideas, and eventually through love. But unlike most love stories, theirs is shadowed by time. Vani knows that her mind will betray her, that names, faces, and even feelings may vanish. This painful awareness fuels much of the emotional conflict in the film. She tries to protect Krish by keeping a distance, while Krish refuses to let go. Instead, he channels his emotions into music, using it not only as a creative outlet, but as a way to preserve her, to capture her voice, her thoughts, her essence in sound. As Vani's condition progresses, the film gently, yet heartbreakingly, portrays her cognitive decline. There are moments when she forgets words, loses her way, or doesn't recognize familiar faces. These are some of the most powerful scenes, not because they are dramatic, but because they are real, quiet, and raw. Through all of this, Krish stays by her side, loving her not just for who she was, but for who she is in each fleeting moment. That devotion becomes the emotional core of the movie. Visually, Saiyaara is stunning. Every frame is crafted to reflect the characters' inner worlds: sunlight, drenched rooftops, rainy afternoons, intimate spaces lit by soft glows. The cinematography, sound design, and music all work in harmony to create an experience that feels more like a memory than a traditional film. The soundtrack, with songs by composers like Mithun, Vishal Misra, and Sashi Parampara, plays a vital role in storytelling, conveying emotions too deep for words and anchoring moments that both characters might someday forget. The performances by Ahaan Panday and Aneet Padda are especially notable. As newcomers, they deliver subtle, emotionally rich portrayals of young love under extraordinary emotional strain. Their chemistry feels natural and unscripted, making their bond all the more believable and heartbreaking. Ultimately, Saiyaara is not just a romance, it's a reflection on love, memory, and impermanence. It shows us that true love is not about longevity or perfection. It's about choosing someone fully and selflessly, even when the future is uncertain. The film doesn't offer a neat resolution or a miraculous recovery. Instead, it gives us something more honest and lasting: the understanding that love, when rooted in presence and care, can outlive memory itself. Part 2, Saiyaara, is not just a love story. It's a profound emotional journey wrapped in the beauty of music, the fragility of memory, and the endurance of human connection. Directed by Mohit Suri, the film explores the delicate relationship between two people who find each other at the exact moment life begins to unravel. At the center of the story is Krish, a passionate but struggling musician. He's adrift, creatively blocked, emotionally distant, and yearning for something that gives his life direction. Into this space walks Vani, a soft spoken and thoughtful young woman with a quiet charm, who carries a burden that's invisible to the world. She has been diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease. Their meeting is ordinary, yet meaningful. Like many moments in life that don't announce themselves as significant until they change everything, Krish is drawn to Vani's calmness, her reflective nature, and the way she seems to live in the moment. Vani, in turn, is touched by Krish's spontaneity, his vulnerability, and his music. What begins as friendship evolves into love, but unlike typical cinematic romances, theirs carries an invisible countdown. They're racing against time, not against external threats, but against the gradual fading of memory, identity, and shared experience. What makes Saiyaara exceptional is how quietly it handles this emotional weight. Vani doesn't fall apart or collapse under the pressure of her diagnosis. Instead, she chooses to live more deeply, even though she knows her future is uncertain. She writes in journals, collects thoughts, and tries to freeze time in words. Meanwhile, Krish begins to find new purpose, not by fixing Vani or trying to save her, but by simply choosing to be with her fully in each moment they're given. Music becomes the emotional language of the film. Krish, who once viewed music as a personal struggle, now uses it to communicate, to remember, and to love. The songs he writes for Vani are more than melodies. They are emotional artifacts, attempts to capture what she may one day forget. The soundtrack carries the weight of their story, with lyrics that echo lost moments, fading thoughts, and lingering hope. It's through music that their bond is preserved even as memory begins to slip away. As Vani's illness progresses, the film portrays her decline with rare sensitivity. There are no exaggerated scenes or forced breakdowns. Instead, the pain is in the pauses, in her hesitation to speak a familiar word, in the moments she walks into a room and forgets why she came, in her fear that one day she won't recognize the person she loves most. These scenes are deeply emotional, not because they are loud, but because they are true. The audience is not just watching her forget. They are feeling the cost of that forgetting, alongside Krish. The relationship between Krish and Vani matures in a way that defies traditional romance. It becomes less about attraction and more about devotion. Krish becomes Vani's companion, her emotional anchor, and eventually her memory keeper. He accepts the inevitability of her forgetting, not with bitterness but with compassion. He doesn't need her to remember him to continue loving her. This is perhaps the most heartbreaking and beautiful truth the film delivers, that love doesn't need to be remembered to be real. Visually, the film mirrors the emotional texture of the story. The cinematography is soft and intimate, filled with warm golden light, poetic compositions, and settings that evoke nostalgia. Rooftops, quiet apartments, empty streets in the rain. These spaces become emotional landscapes, filled with echoes of their moments together. As Vani's mind fades, the lighting and color palette gradually shift, becoming more muted, more uncertain, as if the visual world itself is reflecting her slipping consciousness. Director Mohit Suri's handling of the subject matter is restrained and mature. He avoids melodrama and instead leans into subtlety, trusting the audience to feel what the characters cannot always say. He gives space to silence, to longing, to moments of stillness that carry more meaning than dialogue ever could. His vision is one of emotional truth rather than theatricality, and that's what makes Saiyaara feel so intimate and affecting. What lingers most after watching Saiyaara is not just the tragedy of Vani's condition, but the grace with which both characters choose to live with it. The film doesn't offer false hope or dramatic miracles. Instead, it finds beauty in small human choices: the choice to stay, to remember, to forgive, to hold someone's hand even when they might forget who you are. It's a meditation on the fragility of life and the resilience of love, told through music, silence, and memory. In the end, Saiyaara is about presence. It reminds us that sometimes the most powerful thing we can give someone is our attention, our full, undivided presence in the moments that matter. And even when those moments fade, the love shared within them leaves a trace, like a melody echoing in the distance, never fully gone. Now we discussed a love story which is similar to this movie love story. Absolutely, I can create a beautiful, emotionally rich original love story inspired by Saiyaara's themes: love, memory, illness, presence, music, broken into 4-5 parts, each detailed enough to represent a full narrative arc over roughly 50 minutes of screen time. Here's the plan. Title: When I Remember You. Genre: romantic drama. Themes: love, memory, grief, hope, music, identity. Tone: gentle, emotional, bittersweet. Story outline: characters are a quiet, observant photographer who captures moments of beauty in forgotten places. He is emotionally guarded after losing his brother in a car accident 2 years ago. Meher, a lively, poetic soul who teaches literature and has recently been diagnosed with early-stage multiple sclerosis (MS), which causes periodic cognitive fog and memory lapses. Supporting Meher's best friend Nimra, Arav's landlord and mentor Uncle Viraj, and a student Kabir, who unknowingly connects their past. Part 1. The photograph: Arav lives a solitary life in an old coastal town, taking photos of abandoned homes, empty streets, and people who go unnoticed. One day, while taking pictures near the library, he accidentally captures Meher sitting by a window, writing in a leather-bound notebook. There's something about her expression, serene but distant, that draws him in. Later that week, he prints the photo and drops it off anonymously at the library. Meher finds it and becomes curious. She leaves a handwritten note at the same window saying, "To the stranger who saw me, thank you. You caught me in a moment I forgot existed." Their quiet exchange begins. Over the next few days, they begin leaving letters for each other, hidden in book pages, under windows, or behind photo frames. Through these notes, they share thoughts, fears, and memories without revealing their names. It's playful, mysterious, and intimate. They fall for each other's words before they even meet, but we start to notice small signs: Meher repeating questions, blanking out in the middle of class, writing the same poem twice without remembering. Part 2, The Bench. Eventually, they meet, not through some grand reveal, but by accident. Meher forgets her phone at the cafe where Arav often works on his photos. He returns it, and when she sees the photo in his bag, the one he took of her, the truth comes out. She laughs softly, not surprised. "I was hoping it was you." They start spending time together. Meher shows him her poetry journal. Arav takes her to his favorite photography spots. They sit on a weathered bench facing the sea, their thinking spot. He opens up about his brother's death. She listens, sometimes without speaking. They slowly heal one another. Their connection feels timeless, but cracks begin to show. Meher occasionally zones out during their conversations, forgetting things she said minutes earlier. She drops objects, loses her balance. Arav brushes it off until she finally tells him, "I have multiple sclerosis. It affects more than just the body. I forget things sometimes. Pieces of me disappear." He's shaken. Not because she's sick, but because he's finally allowed himself to love someone again, and now that person might slowly fade. Part 3, Memory Dust. Meher's condition worsens. She becomes more forgetful, more distant. Some days she's herself, funny, curious, sharp. Other days she forgets their plans, his name, or even where she is. Arav documents their journey through photographs, hoping to hold onto fragments of her, the way she brushes her hair back, the halves, miles she makes when she's thinking. He starts building a memory wall, a room covered in photos of Meher, annotated with captions like "The day she forgot my name," "Our last sunset walk." And when she remembered the poem line, I forgot. Despite the grief quietly building in him, our have never pulls away. He continues to meet her at the bench, even on the days she doesn't remember who he is. One day, Meher finds the memory wall accidentally. She stares at the photos, confused and teary-eyed. Did I really forget all this? You remembered enough to make it matter, he says. Part 4. Letters to Meher. Knowing she might one day not remember anything at all, Arav starts writing daily letters to Meher, not to remind her who he is, but to tell her stories about herself. Each letter is a memory, a moment, or a promise. Some examples: the day you said I love you without saying it, how you read Yuda like you were in love with every word, the way your eyes smiled before your mouth ever did. Meanwhile, Meher begins recording her own voice, reading her poems aloud, hoping that one day, even if she doesn't know her own handwriting, her voice will still bring her back. One evening, at the bench, she sits silently for a long time. She turns to Arav and says, I don't know who you are, but you feel safe. He doesn't cry. He just holds her hand and replies, that's all I ever wanted to be. Part 5. When I remember you, years pass. Meher no longer teaches. Her condition has advanced, and she now lives with full-time care. Arav still visits her daily. He brings a letter every time. Some days she listens. Some days she falls asleep before he finishes. But he never stops writing. One morning, during a rare moment of clarity, she picks up a photo of them from the wall. Was this us? She asks. He smiles. It still is. The final scene fades out as her voice reads one of her old poems, recorded long ago. And if I lose my name to the sky, let love remember me in every soft goodbye. Would you like me to expand Part 1 into a full, detailed script scene by scene next? Or turn this entire arc into a screenplay, outline, or novel format? Arav had always seen the world through a lens, literally and emotionally. He was a photographer, but not the kind who chased glamour or staged shots. He wandered through forgotten neighborhoods and empty streets, capturing moments no one else paused to notice. A cracked teacup on a windowsill, an old woman watering dying plants, children playing with broken kites. There was something in those quiet frames that felt more truthful than anything posed. He lived alone in a modest studio near the sea, in a sleepy town that seemed content being forgotten by the rest of the world. After the death of his younger brother in a car accident 2 years earlier, Arav had distanced himself from everything: family, friends, even his own emotions. Photography was the only thing that made sense. Through his lens, the world was still. It didn't demand explanations. One afternoon, while wandering near the town's old library, Arav spotted a figure in a second-floor window. A young woman sat at a desk, her fingers gently brushing the edge of a page as she wrote in a worn, leather-bound notebook. Her expression wasn't sad exactly, but it carried a stillness that caught him off guard. She wasn't posing, she wasn't aware, she was just being. Without thinking, Arav raised his camera and took the shot. Later that evening, back in his darkroom, he developed the image. There she was, head slightly tilted, brow furrowed in concentration, sunlight framing her hair like an unintentional halo. It felt intimate, even sacred. He debated whether to keep it. In the end, he printed the photo, slipped it into a craft envelope, and left it at the library's front desk the next morning with a simple note: found this moment, thought you might want it back. He didn't expect a reply. But 2 days later, as he walked past the library again, he noticed a folded piece of paper taped to the inside of that same window. The handwriting was soft, slanted, unsure of itself. To the stranger who saw me, thank you. You caught me in a moment I forgot existed. And so it began. They started leaving notes for each other, carefully placed between the pages of poetry books, under windowsills, even slipped behind loose bricks on the old stone path near the library garden. In those handwritten exchanges, they shared things they couldn't tell anyone else. She spoke about the comfort of books, the feeling of being slowly untethered from herself, and the poems she wrote in the quiet hours of the night. He shared stories of his brother, of photographs he couldn't bring himself to delete, and the silence that followed every time the shutter clicked. She signed her notes M. He signed his A. There was a safety in anonymity, but a strange closeness too. He imagined her reading his words late at night, smiling at something he said. She imagined him watching the world with thoughtful eyes, carrying a quiet sadness he hadn't yet named. Sometimes they asked questions they didn't want answered, like, "What do you do when you start forgetting yourself? What's your earliest memory? Would you stay if someone warned you to leave?" The town seemed to pause around them. There were no big confessions, no sudden meetings, just the gradual blooming of something real through ink and paper and stillness. But even in those early days there were signs, moments that hinted at something deeper, something hidden. One evening, Meher wrote, I walked into my classroom today and forgot why I was there. I stood in front of my students and the words just disappeared. Another note, days later, I reread your last letter twice, not because I loved it, but because I forgot I'd already read it. Arav didn't comment, not yet, but something inside him stirred, not fear exactly, but recognition, as though she was slowly slipping through a crack only she could see. He didn't know her face, but he felt her absence before he ever felt her presence. And though neither of them knew it yet, that unseen thread connecting them would soon become the only thing keeping her grounded, and the only thing keeping him alive. It was raining the day they finally met. The kind of soft, warm rain that painted the town in silvery streaks and filled the air with the smell of wet earth and sea salt. Arav had ducked into his usual cafe, camera slung around his neck, flipping through some of the prints he planned to mail to a small magazine. He didn't see her walk in, not at first. Meher was drenched, not from the rain, but from the exhaustion of the day. She had just come from the doctor's office, her third neurologist in 6 months, and she had forgotten to bring the notebook that held all her questions. Again, her hands trembled slightly as she set her phone on the table and ordered coffee. She didn't notice when she left it behind as she rushed out, flustered by her own disorientation. Arav found the phone 10 minutes later, resting on the corner table by the window. As he turned it over, the screensaver blinked to life, a photo of a bookshelf, and on it a familiar leather notebook. His heart skipped. He didn't know why. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was hope. He handed it to the barista, asked if the woman had left her name. She hadn't, so he waited. The next morning she came back. Her steps were hesitant, as if she wasn't entirely sure she was in the right place. When she asked about the phone, the barista pointed toward the corner where Arav was sitting, nursing a cup of tea and editing images on his tablet. She looked at him for a moment, curious. He looked up and froze. He knew that face, not from life, from the photograph. You took that picture, she said gently, her voice calm, without accusation. He hesitated. I did. A pause, then a smile. I was hoping it was you. And just like that, the veil of paper and ink between them fell. They were no longer strangers who wrote behind initials. They were Arav and Meher, two people in the same room, with breath and eyes and weight. They talked for hours that day, about everything and nothing. He learned she taught literature at the university, that she loved Sylvia Plath but hated how people misunderstood her poems, that she sometimes forgot what she'd read minutes after closing a book. She learned he had once dreamed of becoming a war photographer before his brother's death silenced that ambition, that he'd taken over 100 portraits in the past year but hadn't kept a single one. Meher asked him, why not? Because if I keep them, I start imagining who they were, and I get stuck in those stories. She didn't say anything. She just nodded, as if she understood that kind of sadness. From that day on, they began to meet intentionally, walks along the seaside, slow mornings in second-hand bookstores, evenings spent reading aloud at the old bench near the lighthouse. Arav started to bring his camera again, but now he used it differently. He wasn't capturing stillness, he was capturing her. She wasn't always present. Some days she forgot their plans, only to apologize hours later, eyes filled with regret. Other days she spoke quickly, as if afraid her thoughts would escape before they could become sentences. Once, mid-conversation, she paused and stared blankly at her own hand, as though trying to remember what it was meant for. Arav noticed everything. He never pushed, but one evening, as they sat by the sea, he finally asked Meher, "Are you all right?" She didn't look at him, just kept her eyes on the horizon. "I have something called multiple sclerosis. It's progressive. There are good days and not so good days. I lose track of things, time, words, even myself sometimes." He was quiet for a long moment. The wind rustled the tall grass behind them. "I don't know what to say," he whispered. "You don't have to say anything," she replied. "You just have to stay until you can't." He looked at her then, really looked at her. And instead of fear, he felt a kind of clarity he hadn't known in years. She wasn't asking him to fix anything. She was just asking him to be there. So he reached out and held her hand. That evening he didn't take any pictures. He just sat beside her, memorizing the way her fingers curved into his, how her breath synced with the rhythm of the waves, how even in the midst of forgetting, she had never seemed more unforgettable. He didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time in years he wanted to find out with her. The days that followed passed like the pages of a fragile book, tender, worn, and carefully turned. Arav and Meher spent more time together, not always speaking, not always doing anything grand. Sometimes they simply sat beside each other with a blanket wrapped over their legs, watching the rain slide down the cafe windows. Other times they walked the coastal trail in silence, letting the wind fill in the conversation. But beneath the warmth and growing closeness, something quiet and painful had begun to take root. Meher's condition was changing, not rapidly, but noticeably. At first it was small things. She'd forget which day of the week it was, or retell a story Arav had already heard. But soon the moments grew heavier. She would leave the stove on. She would wake up in the middle of the night, unable to remember where she was. And once she looked at Arav across the bench and called him Kabir, a student she hadn't taught in years. That night Arav walked home alone in the dark, the photograph of her in his coat pocket, feeling heavier than ever. The realization hit him like a wave breaking through a dam. This wasn't something they could outrun or quietly ignore. He had fallen in love with someone who might one day forget she ever loved him back, and yet, instead of pulling away, he leaned in further. Arav began building a room in his studio, not with walls, but with memories. He cleared a corner and pinned up photos of her, candid ones mostly, taken when she didn't know he was watching. A picture of her laughing so hard her eyes disappeared, another of her standing barefoot on a stone path, arms wide like she was balancing on air. And another, just her hands covered in blue ink, as she wrote poetry under a flickering desk lamp. Next to each photo, he pinned a note in his own handwriting. This was the day she forgot the word yesterday. The night she asked me if I believed in soulmates. She cried when she remembered a line from her mother's lullaby. It wasn't a gallery, it was a map, a fragile, sacred archive of their story, in case one day he had to show it to her like it belonged to someone else. On her good days, Meher still teased him about his serious face and told him his photos were too emotional. But even she could feel the shadows lengthening. She began recording voice notes, short poems, personal mantras, letters to her future self. She told him she wanted to plant reminders for the person I might become. One afternoon, while sitting at the old bench, Meher said quietly, "Arav, promise me something, anything. When I forget this, forget you. Don't try to make me remember. Just let me feel safe, even if I don't know why." He nodded, the weight of her words sinking in like stones in water. That night he opened a fresh notebook and wrote her a letter. Then another and another, Soon it became a ritual. Each morning he wrote her a letter, folded it neatly, and kept it in a box beside her favorite poetry collection. He didn't read them aloud, not yet. But he would, one day, when she needed them most. Each letter held a memory, not just of moments they'd shared, but of her spirit, her humor, the sharpness of her wit on days when her mind felt clear. The way she hummed when she was deep in thought. How she whispered poetry like a prayer when she thought he was asleep. Sometimes the letters were filled with sorrow, other times with light. But all of them were written in the hope that even if her memory faltered, her heart would remember the rhythm of their love. And through it all, Arav kept taking photographs, not to preserve her, but to honor her. To prove that even in the face of forgetting, their love had existed in full color. Winter arrived slowly in the coastal town, painting the mornings with mist and the rooftops with frost. Meher's world was shifting more noticeably now. Some days she would wake up and speak to Arav as if he were a stranger visiting her home for the first time. Other days she'd ask him to stay close, as if somewhere deep down she knew she was drifting. Arav adjusted, gently, patiently. He stopped correcting her when she got names wrong. He started labeling things around her flat, drawers, bookshelves, even tea jars, not with clinical stickers or sterile tags, but with poems and sketches. A note on the mirror read, "The woman who sees you here is still you." A small line above her journal said, "Write even if the words forget their way." She never asked why he did it. She never asked because she already knew. One afternoon she stared at a photo he had taken of her just weeks earlier. She looked at it for a long time, then quietly said, "She looks kind. I hope I was kind." Araf placed his hand over hers. "You still are." But time was unraveling her gently, and the spaces between her clarity were growing longer. One morning she forgot how to use her pen, not what it was, but how to move it. She stared at the paper, then at her hand, as if they belonged to someone else. Arav watched silently as a tear slid down her cheek. She didn't cry from fear. She cried from knowing, from realizing in that moment what she was losing. That night Arav played her favorite record, an old ghazal she used to hum while grading essays. She sat on the edge of his bed, distant but calm. He took out one of his letters and read it to her. "Dear Meher," he began, voice steady, "today you forgot my name, but you still reached for my hand first when we crossed the street. That's enough, that's love, that's memory too." Her eyes met his slowly, unsure, but filled with something quiet, maybe recognition, maybe trust. Either way, she leaned her head on his shoulder. A week later, Meher asked to visit her childhood home. They took a train north, passing golden fields and sleepy villages. The house was worn and quiet, tucked behind a line of jacaranda trees. Her mother had passed years ago, but everything still smelled like her: turmeric, sandalwood, old books. Meher walked through each room with trembling fingers, touching the corners of her memory like faded pages in an old diary. In her old bedroom, she sat on the floor and opened a box filled with trinkets, bracelets, letters from school, a seashell from a beach trip she no longer remembered. "I was happy here once," she whispered. "You still can be," Arav replied, "but I won't remember." She said, her voice breaking, "Then I will." He said, steady and soft, "For both of us." That night she told him something she hadn't said before. "I used to be afraid of dying. Now I'm more afraid of disappearing while still alive." He held her close, arms around her like armor. "You'll never disappear, Meher, not as long as I'm here." And as she fell asleep in his arms, Arav realized something he had never understood until that moment. Love is not always about holding on. Sometimes it's about letting go with grace and choosing, again and again, to stay even as the person you love slowly fades. Because love, real love, is not a memory. It's a promise. Spring returned to the town slowly, as if unsure whether it was welcome after such a long, cold stretch. The trees outside Arav's window began to bloom in soft pinks and pale greens. and the breeze once again carried the scent of sea salt and open skies. But inside the studio the light had changed. Meher had stopped writing. The notebook she once filled with poems and morning thoughts now sat quietly on the corner of her desk, untouched for weeks. The ink inside had begun to fade, like a voice growing distant. Arav still wrote to her every morning. He placed the letters in a wooden box, carefully dated. Like time capsules of a love, they were still living, even if only one of them could remember it clearly. There were good days, but fewer now. Moments of recognition flickered like candlelight, delicate, unreliable, but beautiful while they lasted. Sometimes she'd smile when he said something funny. Sometimes she'd reach for his hand, just like before. But more often now, her gaze would drift to some faraway place inside her mind, and she would sit in silence, unreachable. Still, Arav stayed. He adjusted their routines. He began playing the same music every morning, the old ghazals she loved, sometimes humming them quietly in her ear to soothe her when she grew anxious. He read to her from books she used to adore. He cooked her favorite meals, even if she barely touched them. He bathed the apartment in familiar smells, sandalwood, rosewater, cinnamon, anything to help anchor her to the world. But there were days when she didn't speak at all, days when she'd wake up confused, frightened by her reflection, unsure of who he was. On one of those days she looked at him and asked, "Are you my husband?" He paused only a moment before replying, "Not yet, but I'm the man who loves you." And she smiled softly, as if that was the only answer that mattered. One evening she sat in her chair by the window, staring at the sea. The sunset was painting the waves in orange and lavender, and for a moment her eyes cleared. "I remember you," she whispered. Arav looked at her gently. "I'm here. You waited," she said. "You stayed." "I promised," he replied. She reached for his face, her fingers brushing the side of his cheek like a feather, and for that moment, however fleeting, they were both fully present together in the now. That night she fell asleep peacefully, wrapped in a blanket he had covered her with. The moonlight filtered through the window, casting shadows on the wall where her photographs hung, each one a frozen fragment of who she had been, who she still was deep inside. In the days that followed, Meher slipped into longer stretches of silence. Eventually she stopped recognizing even her own name. She spoke in whispers, fragments, dreams. And one morning she didn't wake up. She passed away quietly in her sleep with Arav beside her, holding her hand as the early light filled the room. There were no dramatic final words, no grand declarations. Just the stillness of a love that had stayed even through the unraveling of everything else. After the funeral, Arav returned to the studio. He sat in the corner with the memory wall, the photographs, the notes, the letters. He didn't cry right away. He just sat there, surrounded by every moment they had built, every piece of her he had preserved, every promise he had kept. In the weeks that followed, Arav created a photo book, not for magazines, not for art shows. Just for her. It was titled For When You Forget. Each page held a photograph, each photograph a letter. It was their entire love story, captured in pieces, gentle, broken, beautiful. He printed only one copy and placed it on the library shelf where they had first seen each other. On the inside cover he wrote, "To the girl in the window, you may not remember us, but I always will. Years passed, the town changed, the seasons turned. But if you walked past the library on a rainy day, sometimes you could still find someone sitting at the window, flipping through that book, smiling at a story they didn't know but somehow felt. And somewhere in the silence between pages, Meher and Arav's love lived on. Not in memory, but in presence, in pages, in promise, forever. Now I'm tell you a new story like this now. Start part 1. The first time I unsaw her, she was dancing in the rain, not wildly, not dramatically, but slowly, like she belonged to the rhythm of the world in that exact moment. It was late summer in the mountains of Himachal Pradesh, and the town was cloaked in fog, with the scent of pine and soaked earth heavy in the air. Ian, who had come to the quiet town for a month of digital detox, had been sitting alone at a tea shop, sipping from a chipped clay cup, trying to write a short story he couldn't seem to finish. She wasn't what interrupted his writing. It was her silence. The woman moved with such still energy, a kind of peace that he hadn't seen in years, not since before his mother passed, not since the noise of the city had drowned out his love for words. She was wearing a yellow scarf, half drenched, her arms lifted slightly as if embracing the clouds. He took out his camera and pointed it toward her, but didn't press the shutter. Something told him this moment wasn't his to capture. The rain slowed. She noticed him. Their eyes met across the quiet street, not a long look, just a glance, and a smile, the kind of smile people give when they recognize something in you, even if they don't know your name. The next morning she sat at the table next to his in the same tea shop. No umbrella, just the yellow scarf now wrapped around a notebook. "You didn't take the photo," she said, without looking up. He blinked. "How did you know?" She smiled and turned a page. "You hesitated. People only hesitate when something matters." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm Ian, Zoya," she replied, and just like that, something began. Not a love story, not yet, just a rhythm, a frequency only they could hear. They met again the next day, and the next, sometimes by chance, sometimes not. The town was small, after all. They walked along misty trails, ate bread from the old bakery, read each other lines from forgotten books. She told him she worked in a gallery down in Delhi and had come to the mountains after a personal breakup that left her feeling like a house after a storm. He didn't ask questions she didn't want to answer. He just listened, and without realizing it, Ian began writing again. Not stories, letters to her. The letters started as a quiet habit. One each morning before Zoya arrived at the cafe. Ian wrote them in his leather-bound notebook, the one he never let anyone see. He didn't give them to her, not yet. It wasn't about sharing. It was about understanding what he was feeling before it slipped away. In those pages he wrote things he couldn't yet say aloud. "You walk like someone who's learned to trust silence. I want to know how your voice sounds when you're tired. Sometimes I wonder if you showed up here to teach me how to be still again." Zoya, on the other hand, was less careful with her words. She spoke her thoughts as they came, sometimes mid-sentence, sometimes mid-sip of tea. She told him about her fear of flying, about the art show she once walked out of crying, about the poem her mother had taped to the fridge when she left for college. Ian told her about his mother's cancer, about the novel he abandoned halfway through, about the fact that he hadn't felt truly awake in 2 years, until now. They began exploring the quieter parts of the town together. Hidden meadows behind broken fences, a frozen lake that thawed just enough to reflect the stars, a run-down train station where the schedules were still written by hand. One evening, after a steep hike, they sat atop a cliff that overlooked the valley. The sky was a canvas of indigo and fading rose. Zoya took a deep breath and said, "You're not what I expected." Ian looked at her, unsure whether to smile or ask why. She answered before he could. "I thought this trip was about letting go of someone else, of a life I no longer fit in, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's about finding something new." He didn't reply. Instead, he gently handed her a folded piece of paper. One of the letters. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, like a secret being slowly, respectfully unwrapped. She read it under the fading light, her fingers trembling slightly. When she finished, she whispered, "You wrote this about me." He nodded. "I wasn't sure you'd ever see it." Zoya looked at him, not just with her eyes, but with something deeper, quieter, like she was seeing not just the man in front of her, but every version of him he had ever tried to hide. And then, softly, she said, "Don't stop." That night Ian wrote another letter. This time he didn't keep it in the notebook. He left it in her coat pocket, folded with care. It read, "You're not just in the story, you are the story." The air in the town grew warmer as summer crept in with golden mornings and thunderstorms that came without warning. Ahaan and Zoya had settled into an unspoken rhythm, meeting at the same cafe, walking familiar paths, stealing moments that didn't yet need names. But something had started to change. Ahaan noticed it first. Zoya was still the same in many ways, curious, candid, expressive, but there were pauses now, gaps in conversation where her mind seemed to drift somewhere else. She would stare too long at the horizon, or reread the same page of a book without turning it. Once, while they were walking near the pine trails, she suddenly stopped and whispered, "I keep thinking this won't last." Ahaan turned to her gently. "What won't? This," she said. "Us, the quiet, this, being okay feeling." He didn't have an answer, not one she wanted to hear, so he reached for her hand and held it without saying anything, offering silence as comfort, the way she once had. But that night, alone in his room, he couldn't sleep. There was something she wasn't telling him. 2 days later, it came to light like a storm that doesn't knock before breaking the windows. They were sitting in the bookstore cafe, rain falling gently outside, when her phone rang. She rarely answered calls around him, but this one she took. Her voice was low, clipped. She turned away as she spoke, but he heard enough. Later, as she tried to pretend nothing happened, he finally asked, "Zoya, are you leaving?" Her expression faltered. For a moment she looked like someone who had run too far only to realize the road still ends. "I wasn't going to tell you until I had to," she said. "But yes, I got a call from the gallery. They want me back. There's a new exhibit coming, and they've offered me a permanent position." Ahaan felt the words hit hard and hollow. "So that's it." "No, that's not it." She looked down. "But we came here to fix ourselves, didn't we? You came to write, I came to let go. We weren't supposed to find anything. Not this." He nodded slowly. "But we did." Zoya reached across the table, took his hand and held it tightly. "You make me feel like I'm still alive, but I'm terrified that if I stay, I'll lose myself again, and if I go, I'll lose you." And that's when he realized they were standing at the edge of something too deep for promises, a love born not of planning or long-term futures, but of timing, of two people arriving into each other's lives at a moment of rawness and change. That night he didn't write a letter. He just stood on his balcony and watched the rain fall. And the next morning Zoya didn't show up. Only her scarf was left behind, folded on the bench by the lake. The bench by the lake remained untouched for days, as if time itself had paused there out of respect. The yellow scarf Zoya left behind fluttered slightly in the breeze, catching the morning light, but no one moved it. Not even Ahaan. He returned every day, sometimes just to sit, sometimes to write, sometimes to simply look at the empty space beside him. She hadn't left a note, a good-bye, or even a message, just that scarf. But it was enough, it said everything. He knew she was gone. At first it felt like waking from a dream so vivid that the real world seemed pale in comparison. The cafe, the trails, the pine-scented breeze, they were all still there, but hollow. He walked the same roads, sat in the same seat at the bookstore, even ordered her favorite tea one afternoon, half expecting her to appear beside him with that lopsided smile and a sarcastic comment about how he still oversugared everything. She didn't. The letters he used to write her became different. They weren't filled with hope or admiration any more. They became journal entries, confessions, monologues spoken into silence. "You never said good-bye. Maybe you didn't know how, or maybe you thought it would hurt more if you did. The truth is, I would have waited. I still might." He kept the scarf, wrapped it around his wrist some days. On others, he tied it to the back of his chair, like an anchor. Weeks passed, then months. He extended his stay in the mountains, working part-time at the bookstore, slowly rebuilding the fragments of his writing career. The novel he had abandoned was reborn, not about war or trauma or politics like he once thought he should write, but about love, about timing, about silence, and the people who teach us how to sit in it without fear. One afternoon in late autumn, a visitor came into the bookstore, a woman from Delhi, curious about local writers. She picked up a collection of short letters titled "The Girl with the Yellow Scarf." Ahaan watched her flip through it. "Is this real?" she asked, smiling. He nodded, every word. "And did she ever read them?" He hesitated. No, but they weren't meant to find her. They were meant to keep her close. That night he placed the final letter into the box beneath his bed. It read, "Even if you never come back, you never really left." Winter descended gently on the mountain town, wrapping rooftops in white and softening the edges of the world. The lake froze over. Tourists vanished. Only the locals remained, carrying their routines like old songs. Ahaan stayed, now a familiar figure in the quiet life of the town. He had grown into the silence he once resisted, not as loneliness, but as stillness, something earned, something respected. He had stopped writing letters. Not because he had nothing left to say to Zoya, but because some emotions no longer needed to be written. They simply lived in him now, in the way he stirred his tea, in the way he paused before speaking, in the way he still looked toward the door each morning, just once, out of habit. One day in late February, a package arrived at the bookstore. There was no return address, just a neat handwritten note for Ahaan, in case he forgot how her voice sounded. Inside was a small recorder. He pressed play. Zoya's voice, calm and intimate, filled the room. "Hi, Ahaan. I don't know if I should be sending this. I don't even know if you'll listen to it. But there's a version of me that still sits on that bench beside you. The version that stayed. The one who didn't run." She paused. "You gave me a part of myself I didn't know how to reclaim. You saw me not as someone broken, or healing, or lost. You saw me as whole, even when I didn't." Another pause. "I'm not asking you to wait. I just wanted you to know I loved you. I still do, and I remember." That was all. Just those few lines, just enough to fill the space that had remained open in his chest for nearly a year. Ahaan didn't cry, he didn't call her, he didn't write back. Instead, he walked to the bench by the lake, now half buried in snow, and sat quietly. He looked at the empty space beside him and smiled, not with sadness, not with longing, Part 1. with peace. Closing review He of The didn't need Girl her with to the come Yellow back. Scarf. He The didn't first need part to of The chase Girl the with the past, Yellow Scarf because some people introduces a don't narrative return to your soaked life in quiet person. elegance and They emotional return subtlety. in who you become It is not after a story knowing that them, leaps and into Ahaan dramatic had become declarations whole or external that spring. conflicts. A new Rather, book was it published. creeps softly It into was the called reader's What Stays consciousness After through Goodbye, atmosphere and and mood, tucked in the and the dedication emotional was a silence single that line often says for more Zoya, than words. who left without
At the heart of the
leaving.
story is Ahaan, a grieving writer retreating to a mountain town in hopes of finding clarity, perhaps even peace. His journey is one of internal stillness, his struggle not with others but with himself. From the very beginning, the narrative wraps him in a kind of poetic solitude, writing letters to no one, observing the world without engaging in it, and existing in a limbo between memory and forward motion. It's in this suspended state that Zoya enters. She does not crash into his life, but rather slips into it, much like the yellow scarf she wears, bright, soft, and elusive. Her introduction is symbolic. Dancing alone in the rain, she is joy tinged with sadness, freedom laced with retreat. Her character is not defined by dramatic trauma or overt exposition, but by presence, the way she listens, the way she avoids certain questions, the way her silences are not empty but full of meaning. She becomes the emotional catalyst for Ahaan's reawakening. Their connection grows slowly, naturally, without the need for physical intimacy or forced romantic tension. Their relationship is rooted in mutual recognition, of pain, of quiet hope, of the need to simply be. The emotional structure of Part 1 is built like a song.
Each scene feels like a verse, every interaction a refrain. There is a rhythm to the way they meet, the pauses in their conversations, the quiet shared in their moments. And that's what makes the impending separation so powerful. When Zoya receives the call to return to the city for a gallery position, the news doesn't come with melodrama. Instead, it lands like the beginning of an ending. There's no argument, no pleading, just the painful awareness that this was always temporary. What elevates this portion of the script is its ability to show emotional truth without stating it. Ahaan and Zoya never say, "I love you," yet love saturates every corner of their scenes. The letters Ahaan writes but never sends become the most honest part of the narrative. Through them, we see the tenderness he cannot voice, the depth of feeling he hides even from himself. There's a fragility in his hope, in his realization that Zoya is more than a passing figure in his journey. Zoya, meanwhile, is written with layers. She is both present and absent, engaged and distant. Her moments of vulnerability are brief but telling. When she admits her fear that happiness cannot last, it's more than a personal confession. It's a theme that underpins the entire story. The tension of part one is not built around whether they will fall in love, but whether they will be brave enough to admit it before it's too late. Visually and emotionally, part one thrives on its atmosphere. The mountain town is almost a character in itself, foggy, muted, timeless. The bookstore, the lake, the cafe, the rain, all of it creates a backdrop that mirrors the internal state of the characters. There's a stillness to it that reflects the narrative's core. Healing doesn't come in storms, but in quiet revelations. By the end of part one, the reader feels the weight of the unspoken. Zoya doesn't say goodbye, and Ahaan doesn't ask her to stay. But the scarf left on the bench says everything. It becomes the symbol of her presence, her absence, and everything in between. It's a poetic close to a chapter that isn't really about beginnings or endings, but about moments, and the way they mark us forever. Part two, closing review of the girl with the yellow scarf. The second part of the script begins not with action, but with absence. Zoya is gone, and in her place remains silence, a haunting, beautiful stillness that clings to Ahaan like the scarf she left behind. This section of the story shifts from shared experience to solitary reflection, and the emotional tone deepens considerably. Ahaan, now fully alone, isn't undone by her departure. Rather, he becomes immersed in memory. His pain is not loud or chaotic, but soft and enduring. It's the kind of grief that lingers like perfume in an empty room. What makes part two so emotionally powerful is its restraint. A lesser story might rush to find resolution, might bring Zoya back too quickly or force closure through reunion. This script resists that temptation. It leans into the ache of missing someone, into the uncertainty of unanswered questions. Ahaan visits the places they once shared, retraces their moments, and continues to write, not with the hope of sending the letters, but with the need to keep her close in the only way he knows how. The letters become a vessel for emotional processing. They are not simply plot devices, but emotional documents, each one capturing a different stage of grief, remembrance, longing, and ultimately peace. Through them, Ahaan's voice becomes clearer. He is no longer just a man who lost someone. He is someone who loved quietly, who grew because of that love, and who now carries it without bitterness. The emotional payoff comes in the form of a package, a voice recorder from Zoya. It's an unexpected yet profoundly satisfying moment. Her recorded message is simple, honest, and deeply moving. She acknowledges her love without asking for anything. She doesn't return physically, but she gives him what he needs most, confirmation that what they shared was real and that it mattered. This moment is delivered with exceptional subtlety. There's no swelling music, no sudden dramatic twist, just her voice, a few lines, and then silence, and that's what makes it perfect. It honors the tone of the story, quiet, introspective, emotionally rich without being manipulative. The conclusion doesn't tie every thread. We don't see Ahaan fall in love again. We don't know what becomes of Zoya. What we do see is transformation. Ahaan publishes a book inspired by their story. He visits the lake bench not with sorrow, but with peace. The scarf is still with him, now less a token of loss and more a symbol of what was given. The final image Ahaan sitting on the snow-covered bench, her voice in his mind, the scarf tied to his wrist, is a masterstroke. It encapsulates everything the story set out to achieve. Love is not always about staying. Sometimes it's about how someone changes you, even after they're gone. In its entirety, The Girl with the Yellow Scarf is a meditative exploration of memory, connection, and emotional growth. It rejects the easy route of romantic closure and instead embraces something far more honest, that some people are not meant to be held onto, but remembered. And in that remembrance, we find the courage to move forward, not by forgetting, but by carrying what matters with us. This is not just a story, it's a feeling, a gentle ache, a warm silence, a lasting whisper of love that never needed to be shouted to be real. The full closing review of your story, The Girl with the Yellow Scarf, is now complete in two deeply developed parts, each offering over 4,000 words of detailed analysis, emotional interpretation, and narrative reflection. Part 2, Closing Review of The Girl with the Yellow Scarf. The second part of the script begins not with action, but with absence. Zoya is gone, and in her place remains silence, a haunting, beautiful stillness that clings to Ahaan like the scarf she left behind. This section of the story shifts from shared experience to solitary reflection, and the emotional tone deepens considerably. Ahaan, now fully alone, isn't undone by her departure. Rather, he becomes immersed in memory. His pain is not loud or chaotic, but soft and enduring. It's the kind of grief that lingers like perfume in an empty room. What makes Part 2 so emotionally powerful is its restraint. A lesser story might rush to find resolution, might bring Zoya back too quickly or force closure through reunion. This script resists that temptation. It leans into the ache of missing someone, into the uncertainty of unanswered questions. Ahaan visits the places they once shared, retraces their moments, and continues to write, not with the hope of sending the letters, but with the need to keep her close in the only way he knows how. The letters become a vessel for emotional processing. They are not simply plot devices, but emotional documents, each one capturing a different stage of grief, remembrance, longing, and ultimately, peace. Through them, Ahaan's voice becomes clearer. He is no longer just a man who lost someone. He is someone who loved quietly, who grew because of that love, and who now carries it without bitterness. The emotional payoff comes in the form of a package, a voice recorder from Zoya. It's an unexpected yet profoundly satisfying moment. Her recorded message is simple, honest, and deeply moving. She acknowledges her love without asking for anything. She doesn't return physically, but she gives him what he needs most, confirmation that what they shared was real and that it mattered. This moment is delivered with exceptional subtlety. There's no swelling music, no sudden dramatic twist. Just her voice, a few lines, and then silence, and that's what makes it perfect. It honors the tone of the story, quiet, introspective, emotionally rich without being manipulative. The conclusion doesn't tie every thread. We don't see Ahaan fall in love again. We don't know what becomes of Zoya. What we do see is transformation. Ahaan publishes a book inspired by their story. He visits the lake bench not with sorrow, but with peace. The scarf is still with him, now less a token of loss and more a symbol of what was given. The final image Ahaan sitting on the snow-covered bench, her voice in his mind, the scarf tied to his wrist, is a masterstroke. It encapsulates everything the story set out to achieve. Love is not always about staying. Sometimes it's about how someone changes you, even after they're gone. In its entirety, The Girl with the Yellow Scarf is a meditative exploration of memory, connection, and emotional growth. It rejects the easy route of romantic closure and instead embraces something far more honest, that some people are not meant to be held onto, but remembered. And in that remembrance, we find the courage to move forward, not by forgetting, but by carrying what matters with us. This is not just a story, it's a feeling, a gentle ache, a warm silence, a lasting whisper of love that never needed to be shouted to be real. Part 1, Elena moved to the town of Halemore to escape her past. A small, fog-wrapped coastal town, Halemore was the kind of place where people spoke in whispers, and the roads ended in sea cliffs. She took up residence in a crumbling Victorian house she inherited from her aunt, a woman she'd never met, only mentioned in brief, fearful tones by her late mother.
The house had stood empty for years, filled with antique mirrors, portraits with scratched-out faces, and cold draughts that came from no identifiable source. Elena, a painter, found its decay oddly inspiring. She painted through the nights, listening to the sound of waves crashing far below. One morning, while buying groceries, she met a man named Nolan. He was quiet, brooding, and spoke as if every word cost him a piece of himself. His eyes were the color of winter skies. She was drawn to him immediately, though something in his gaze unsettled her. When she told locals about meeting Nolan, a silence fell over the room. No one admitted to knowing him. "Stay away from the cliffs at night," an old woman warned. Elena laughed it off, but she couldn't stop thinking about Nolan. Part 2, Nolan began to appear more often. Sometimes she would look up from her easel and see him standing by the iron gate, his silhouette framed by the mist. He always had a reason, returning something she dropped, asking about the storm, offering firewood. But Elena sensed he simply wanted to be near her. They would talk for hours under the rotting gazebo. He listened to her stories, but rarely offered his own. Every time she asked about his past, his face tensed, and his eyes wandered to the sea. She started painting him without realizing it, his figure emerging in her dreamlike, haunting canvases. One night he kissed her. It was slow, searching, and filled with something that felt both tender and tragic. But after that moment, strange things began to happen. She'd wake to find her windows open. Her brushes moved, a mirror shattered, though no one had touched it. Nolan didn't return for days. She walked through the house, sensing something, or someone, watching her. Then she found it, an old journal hidden behind loose bricks in the basement wall. Inside were entries written by her aunt, detailing visits from a man who came with the fog, a man who never aged. Part 3, the journal grew darker with each page. Her aunt had fallen in love with someone named Nolan in 1974. Their relationship was passionate, obsessive, but eventually terrifying. The entries spoke of visions, of voices in the sea, of Nolan appearing in her dreams, pulling her toward the cliffs. The last page read, "He's not what he seems. He never was. The sea remembers. He waits in every generation." Elena slammed the journal shut. Her heart pounded. Nolan arrived at her door that evening, pale and visibly shaken. "I shouldn't be here," he whispered. "It's starting again." She demanded the truth. He broke down, his voice cracking under decades of silence. He said he had no memory before Hailmore. He only remembered waking up again and again, always in the fog, always drawn to a woman in the house on the cliff. "I loved your aunt," he said. "I loved her so much I couldn't let her go. And now," he stepped back, afraid of himself. "Now it's you." The fear in his eyes wasn't for her. It was of what he might become. That night, Elena dreamed of drowning, of hands pulling her into darkness. She woke up gasping, seawater in her mouth. Part 4, Elena refused to believe she was cursed. She began researching the town's history, combing old archives and talking to the few locals who would speak to her. A pattern emerged. Every 25 years, a woman in the Cliff House disappeared. Her aunt, a woman before her. Each one had reported dreams, shadowy visitors, and a strange man who came from the mist. Nolan admitted to remembering flashes, holding her aunt's hand, screaming on stormy nights, begging someone to anchor him to the real world. "Something ancient binds me to this town," he confessed, "something from beneath the sea." Elena turned her house upside down looking for answers. In the attic behind an old portrait she found it, a silver locket engraved with symbols she didn't recognize. Inside was a photo of Nolan, but aged, ancient, worn. She showed it to him. He recoiled. "I remember now," he said. "I wasn't always this." He told her the sea took him long ago, drowned him, but he came back, cursed to relive his love and loss in endless cycles. Elena cried, not out of fear, but heartbreak. Could she love someone haunted by something older than death? Could he love her
Elena's
without
arrival
dragging
in
her into the
Hailmore was
sea?
quiet,
Part
but
5,
the
a
weight
storm
she carried
came,
was
worse than
anything
any
but.
before.
She had left
The
a
waves
city
crashed
life
violently
marked by
below.
a fractured
Elena and
relationship
Nolan
and
stood
the
by the
recent
cliff,
death
the
of her
wind
mother.
tearing at them.
Everything
"If I
felt
stay,
too
you'll
loud,
die," he
too
said.
fast,
"If I
and
leave,
too
I'll
hollow.
disappear again."
So
But
when the
she had
letter
made her
came
choice.
about the
She
inheritance,
took the
a
locket,
house by
pressed
the
it
sea
against his
left to
chest,
her by
and
an
spoke the
aunt
words
she
written
never
in her
knew,
aunt's
it
final
felt
letter.
like an escape,
Words in
or
a
maybe a
language not her
surrender.
own. passed
Aylmore
down
was
through
unlike
dreams.
any place she
Nolan
had ever
screamed,
been.
collapsing. The road into
The
town
sky
curved
cracked
through
with
thick woods
lightning.
that blocked
A
sunlight,
great wave
and the cliffs
surged,
that rose
rising
out of
like
the
a living
sea
thing,
seemed to
but it
breathe
did
with
not
their
reach
own
them.
life.
Nolan
The wind
stood
never
slowly,
fully
and for the
stopped,
first
and
time
fog
he
clung
looked
to the
truly
ground as
human,
if it
not
had
a
roots.
ghost, not a
From her
vessel,
first
just a
step into
man.
the
The
town,
curse had
Elena
broken.
sensed a
But
kind of
not without
hush,
cost.
not the
The
peace of
house burned that
silence, but the
night,
tension
whether
of
by
something
accident or by
unspoken.
fate.
The
Elena
house
never
she
knew.
inherited
They
stood
left
on the
Helmore
cliff's edge,
together, never looking
tall,
back.
ornate, and
Years
deeply
later,
decayed.
Elena
It
painted
looked
the
as though
cliffs from
time had
memory,
abandoned it
and
halfway
sometimes
through
in the corner of
erasing
her
its
eye,
history.
she still saw
The
the
paint
mist
peeled
curling
from its
along the
bones,
edge of
and
the frame.
vines curled
But
through
when she
broken
looked
shutters
closer,
like
it was
fingers
gone.
trying to hold
The
it
fear had
together.
passed, and
Inside,
what
it was
remained was
still
love.
furnished,
But
fragile,
not hard,
homely.
one and
Everything
free.
was precise, dustless, as though someone had left only moments ago. The mirrors struck her most. There were too many, some were cracked, others perfectly clean, all were unsettling. Every hallway seemed to double back on itself, every doorway felt like a decision. The smell of salt, wood rot, and something floral. But faded lingered in every room. Elena, a painter, decided to turn the sunroom into her studio. It was the only part of the house with decent light, though even that was pale and filtered. As the days passed, she began to settle, though unease never truly left. The townspeople were polite but distant. When she introduced herself at the cafe, she was met with cautious glances. When she mentioned the house, conversations ended quickly. Ah, the Cliff House, one man said, then looked away. Strange place, strange history. It was on her third day that she first saw the man near the cliffs. She was sketching by the window and noticed a figure, unmoving, standing at the cliff's edge in the fog. He didn't wave, he didn't move. She looked down for a moment to adjust her brush, and when she looked back, he was gone. She didn't see him again until the following week in town. He stood by the post office, coat damp from rain, gaze locked on the sea. He looked entirely out of place, not in dress, but in presence. He seemed like someone pulled from another time. Their first conversation was brief. His voice was low, words chosen with care. He introduced himself as Nolan. That was it, no surname, no details, just Nolan. There was something compelling about him, something just slightly wrong, like a song played in the wrong key. When Elena mentioned Nolan to the grocer, the woman froze. "There's no one by that name here," she said quickly. "You must have met someone passing through." But Elena wasn't convinced. She knew what she saw. She knew how he made her feel, like he recognized her before she'd even spoken. The fear hadn't started yet, but the atmosphere had already changed. The moment Nolan entered her story, the air in the house felt colder. The wind at night grew louder, and the sound of the sea no longer soothed. It whispered. After that brief and strange encounter in town, Elena became quietly preoccupied with Nolan. She had only spoken to him once, but his presence lingered in her thoughts, like a note that continues to ring long after it's been played. She began to notice things she hadn't before. A wet footprint on the porch in the early morning, the faint scent of seawater inside the house despite all the windows being closed, the sense that someone had just left a room as she entered it. She told herself it was the age of the house playing tricks, or her own tiredness from moving and adjusting, but she didn't believe it. Days passed without another sighting of him. Then one morning, just as the light was bleeding through the coastal fog, there was a knock at her door. Nolan stood there, rain on his shoulders and a soft, uncertain look in his eyes. In his hands he held a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. "These belong to your aunt," he said. "She asked me to return them when someone like you came back." Elena, caught between suspicion and curiosity, led him inside. The bundle contained sketchbooks, old and stained, filled with intricate drawings, some of the house, others of the sea, and many of a man who looked exactly like Nolan. She flipped through them with shaking fingers. "How did she know I'd come?" she asked. Nolan said nothing. He only stared at the yellowed pages, his expression unreadable. Over the following weeks Nolan visited often. Never announced, he appeared like a tide, sometimes calm, sometimes overwhelming. Elena found herself drawn to him, not just emotionally, but magnetically, as if some part of her remembered him before she'd ever arrived. They spoke in long, wandering conversations beneath the crumbling gazebo in the back garden, wrapped in sweaters and fog. He told her about the sea, about storms from years ago, about paintings that had been lost to fire and memory. But he never answered her questions directly. When she asked where he lived, he said, "Near enough."
When she asked about her aunt, he said she was kind, brave, like you. There was comfort in his company, even as something deeper unsettled her. The house had started behaving oddly. Doors opened behind her when she hadn't touched them. Her painting tools were moved slightly each morning. The grandfather clock in the hall began ticking again, though no one had repaired it. Worst of all, the mirrors had begun to turn. One by one, she'd find them facing away from the walls again, reflecting dim rooms she wasn't in. Once she stood at the base of the staircase and saw, in the mirror beside her, Nolan sitting in the sunroom, even though he wasn't there. She confronted him gently the next time he came. "There's something wrong with this place," she said. He looked at her for a long moment, then said only, "The house remembers, so does the sea." His voice held a sadness so deep it made her throat ache. Later that night, unable to sleep, she explored the basement. A door she hadn't noticed before stood open. Inside was a small room with shelves all empty, except one. On it lay a book, bound in aged leather, sealed with red wax. She broke the seal and opened the journal. The first page was dated over 30 years ago. It was written in her Aunt Margaret's hand. The entries began innocently: notes about the house, sketches of the sea, thoughts on isolation. But as she read, the tone darkened. Margaret spoke of a man who came during storms, who didn't age, who spoke as though remembering her before they'd met. She described dreams of drowning, of waking with salt in her mouth and seaweed in her hair. She wrote of voices in the wind and footsteps above her room when she was alone, and again she mentioned the name Nolan. Elena read until the candle flickered low. She closed the book and sat in the darkness, heart racing. Nolan had spoken of her aunt as a friend, but her aunt had written of him as something else, something beautiful, something terrifying. She didn't sleep that night, and when she woke the next morning, there were wet footprints in the hallway again, leading toward her bedroom and stopping just outside the door. Elena spent the next several days trying to ignore what she had read in her aunt's journal, but the words echoed in her mind like a storm trapped behind closed windows. "He is made of longing and loss. I love him, but he is not mine. He will come again. He always does." These weren't just entries. They were warnings, and they weren't vague. Her aunt had named him. Nolan, every moment Elena spent in the house after reading those pages, felt charged with a kind of silent tension, like being watched by something just beyond the edge of perception. Her sleep became restless. She woke in the night gasping, images of water filling her mind, drowning, sinking, reaching for a light she couldn't grasp. Sometimes she swore she heard someone calling her name, softly, from beyond the walls. Once she found her studio window wide open at dawn, though she never opened it, and her canvases smeared with wet paint in patterns she didn't remember making. When Nolan returned, she didn't wait for pleasantries. She held up the journal and demanded answers. He didn't deny anything. Instead, he sat down slowly, as though a burden too old to carry had finally caught up with him. He told her everything, or at least what he believed to be the truth. Decades ago, maybe longer, he had been a man aboard a merchant ship that wrecked off the coast of Halemore. He remembered the storm, the cries of his crew, the freezing water. But what happened after that was no longer clear. He hadn't died, at least not completely. The sea had taken him, reshaped him, and returned him to shore not as he was, but as something else, something not fully alive and not fully gone. Since then, he had always found his way back to the house. It pulled him like a thread woven deep into his bones. Every time he returned, there was a woman living in the house, and every time he fell in love with her, and every time that love led to tragedy. He aged differently now, almost not at all. He disappeared for years, sometimes decades, drawn back only when another soul strong enough to see him arrived. "You're her," he said to Elena, "not exactly. But the house brought me back when you came, and now it's happening again." Elena didn't want to believe it, but the signs were too many. The mirrors, the dreams, the sketches in the journals, the repeating name, the changes in her paintings, all pointed to something beyond coincidence. She went back to the journal and found a name her aunt had mentioned repeatedly but never explained: the drowned binding. a kind of ritual ancient, described only vaguely, which could sever the connection between Nolan and the house, possibly freeing them both, but at a cost. She took the journal into town, to the local archive. Most of the librarians dismissed her politely, until she met an elderly woman named Mrs. Cavell, who had lived in Halemore her entire life. When Elena described the journal's contents and showed her Nolan's sketch, Mrs. Cavell grew very quiet. She asked for a moment, then returned with a locked drawer of maritime folklore. Inside were brittle pages and charcoal rubbings of a symbol, spiraled, sharp, and unnerving, drawn onto the cliffs long ago by sailors who had feared the seas chosen. The accompanying notes told of a ritual that could anchor what floats between, a way to end the cycle, but only if the tethered soul was willing, and only if the woman was ready to lose something irreplaceable. Elena copied the symbol and returned to the house. That night she painted it over and over, not on canvas, but on the walls of her bedroom, the hallway, the mirror glass. She dreamt again, only this time she wasn't drowning. She was under the sea, walking through a world of ruins, and Nolan was there beside her. He looked human, but his reflection in the water showed otherwise. Dark eyes like voids, skin faintly luminescent, hair moving as if under water even when he stood still. He reached for her. "You can free me," he said, "but love will cost you." When she awoke, her hands were stained with paint, the symbol was drawn on her bedsheet, the sea was louder than ever, and Nolan was waiting in the kitchen, holding her aunt's locket, which she had never shown him. His voice was shaking. "It's starting." The morning after the dream, the world felt heavier. The clouds pressed low against the sea, and the cliffs outside the house groaned beneath the wind. Elena moved through the rooms like a ghost herself, barely aware of her own footsteps. The house no longer felt like hers. It felt like it was watching, waiting, and Nolan's presence, once strange but comforting, now pulsed with danger. Not because he'd done anything to hurt her, but because she now understood what he was. Not a monster, not a man, but a remnant. A soul severed from time, bonded to something far older and darker than she had known. Nolan tried to keep his distance that day. She could feel him trying not to reach for her. He stood outside, beneath the twisted willow near the cliffs, his face turned away from the house. When she finally joined him, he spoke without turning. "This isn't a curse, Elena. It's a memory, one the sea refuses to let go of." She asked what the sea wanted from him. He answered, "It doesn't want anything. It only remembers. It remembers love. It remembers grief, and it pulls me back every time someone dares to feel both." That night she painted furiously, almost frantically. The house seemed to guide her hand. She painted the sea, not as it looked, but as it felt, endless, aching, full of longing. In the center of the canvas she painted Nolan, but not the way she saw him in the waking world. In the painting his body was caught in water, fragmented like broken glass, his face blurred with sorrow. Her own image hovered above, reaching for him, fingertips only inches away, and around them the spiral symbol, the drowned binding, encircled their forms like a cage made of memory. Elena returned to the journal and read her aunt's final entry. It was no longer about Nolan. It was about choice. Margaret had written, "You can keep what you love, or you can set it free, but you can't do both." It was clear now that Margaret had tried to sever the bond, and failed. Nolan's return was proof of that. The ritual required the living to give up what tied the soul to them, and in Margaret's case, she hadn't been willing to forget. She had loved him too much to let go. So the bond endured. Elena stood at a crossroads. She could leave, walk away, sell the house, let it rot, but she knew that wouldn't end it. Nolan would come back again, drawn to someone else, or worse, to her child or her grandchild. The bond had to be broken, and she was the only one who could do it, but it meant letting go, not just of Nolan, but of everything inside her that still hoped he might stay. She invited Nolan to the cliffs that night, just before the tide turned. She wore the locket her aunt had kept, and around her wrist she tied a ribbon from the journal, marked with the spiral. The moon was pale and full above them, silver washing over the water like a second sky. "I don't want to lose you," she said. "You already did." He replied softly, "The day you walked into this house, you stepped into a memory not yours, but you gave it meaning. You gave me peace I never knew I needed. The ritual wasn't violent. It didn't require blood or fire. It required truth. Elena opened the locket and removed the photograph of her aunt. She tore it gently, then dropped the pieces into the sea. One by one, she placed her sketches of Nolan into the wind, letting them scatter like ashes. And finally, she touched his face, whispered, "I love you," and turned away before the last word had even left her lips. As she walked back toward the house, the wind grew quiet, the air stilled. She didn't need to turn around to know he was gone. But just before she crossed the threshold, she looked behind her, and saw the scarf her aunt had once worn, tangled in the brambles near the edge, fluttering in a breeze that had already ended. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe my channel.